Hi, this is Jordan Blecker, and this is my Module 10 video on the book report assigned for this class. So here it goes. The book I read is entitled Addictive Thinking, Understanding Self-Deception, 2nd edition, and is written by Abraham Twersky. I think Twersky's work is very pertinent to the field of addiction because addiction is a behavior that starts off with a thought, and Twersky's book outlines the faulty thinking that leads to addictive behaviors. The purpose of this book is to review different unhealthy thought behaviors that lead to one to engage in maladaptive addictive behaviors, or as they say in AA, stinkin' thinking. Twersky begins by asking if an addict's disordered thinking causes addiction or if addiction causes disordered thinking. He states that ultimately this is a very complex question, and either way, the only way to stop the behavior is by engaging in abstinence first and foremost. So the question really isn't that pertinent to begin with. Twersky goes on to say that addictive thinking is not affected by intelligence. In fact, people with unusually high intellect often have more intense degrees of addictive thinking than those with lower intellect. For this reason, highly intellectual people may be difficult to treat. Addictive thinking is different from logical thinking in that it does not reach a conclusion based on evidence of a situation, but just the reverse. The addict begins with the conclusion that I need to drink or I need to use a drug, and then builds a cause for that conclusion, logical or not. It is difficult for the addict to identify unhealthy thinking behavior, so it is important for others to identify those thinking patterns for them. Twersky states that the three most common elements in addictive thinking are denial, rationalization, and projection, all of which are unconscious to the person who is thinking them. Denial is due to resistance to change. Rationalization means providing good reasons instead of true reasons. For example, a recent graduate might not apply to a firm that she wants to get a job at, and she might rationalize that by saying that they're looking for somebody with more experience, or the office is too far away, or the starting wage is unsatisfactory, or any number of excuses like that. One might rationalize an addiction and say, no, I'm not an alcoholic, I only drink because X, Y, and Z. It's especially easy to rationalize the use of prescription pain pills. For this reason, it is very difficult to treat this type of addiction. Projection means to blame others for what we are responsible for. This is another type of thinking that could lead to addictive behavior. In treatment, the addict suffers from low self-esteem, so it is extremely important to point out the things that they are doing right and the things that they are good at. Furthermore, the addict also often thinks in black and white, either or thinking. So it is also important to point out the middle ground in certain situations where the addict is having a hard time thinking rationally. Many addicts are also very hypersensitive. Twersky explains that it is like having a severe sunburn all over your body, and the slightest things hurt you very much. For example, they may feel victimized or may have a fear of being rejected, which is why support groups are so helpful. They also tend to worry about things and think that negative things will happen to them. In due course, addicts may begin lying and manipulating as a means to an end, and sometimes eventually even as an end to itself. Twersky also talks about guilt versus shame. He states that you feel guilt when you have done something wrong, but you feel shame about who you are. Addicts often have shame, but not guilt. Guilt can lead to corrective action, but shame cannot. Wires are crossed with the addict. What should produce guilt actually produces shame. The 12 steps helps convert shame into guilt. It does so by convincing the addict that there is not something inherently wrong with them, but instead that they have a disease. Many times the addict thinks that they are always right, which is why the 12 steps are helpful, because they encourage the addict to admit their wrongs and to admit when they make a mistake, such as during the 10th step. Sometimes the addict feels that the normal rewards and pleasures of life just aren't good enough, and they need something more to life, and drugs and alcohol add color to life. Tversky also discusses the subject of hitting rock bottom. He claims that hitting rock bottom doesn't so much mean that you reach the lowest point in your life. It just means that you reach a point in your life where something has occurred that had a sufficient impact to make the addict wish to change at least part of his or her lifestyle. He states that a person will gravitate from a condition that appears to be one of greater distress to one of lesser distress. Not using causes greater distress. Not using substances causes greater distress to the addict. However, with recovery, we can change the person's perceptions and make abstinence seem like it has actual lesser distress. So we do so by reminding the addict of the discomfort that follows using, such as a loss of friends, a loss of family, a loss of a job, hangovers, falls, hallucinations, imprisonment, all of these things that make using seem more distressing than abstinence. So rock bottom is a change in perception where abstinence is seen as a lesser distress than the use of chemicals. Finally, there are two essential factors when it comes to recovery. First, an addict must lose faith in their current reasoning power, and second, the addict must accept the possibility of another version of reality from someone they trust. Once an addict does this, he or she can align their thinking with what is required for their recovery. I think it is very relevant to note that denial, rationalization, and prediction are unconscious phenomenon that drive addictive behavior, and it must be pointed out by an outside source if one is to realistically be effective in their recovery. It is also important to note that extreme sensitivity of the addict is present and how therapy and group attendance can help them sort out all of those intense emotions. Tversky's concept of rock bottom is also very relevant. If one is to make a change, something must happen to initiate that change, such as that realization that the greater distress really is with the using as opposed to with the abstinence. Tversky shared a lot of powerful information in the book, and it will be most helpful for me in my future private practice. For example, it is important for me to acknowledge the sensitivity of my clients. It is also important to realign their disordered thinking, as well as to help them transition from a state of shame to a state of guilt. It is also important to point out their denial, rationalization, and projection, and to show them that life is fulfilling and meaningful without drugs. And finally, it is helpful for me to help them see that there is a possibility of greater distress in using than there is in abstinence. So those are the ways that I can use this book to apply to my practice. And that is all, and thank you very much for watching.